始了是吗？
So shall we begin?
大家好，非常感谢大家今天能够来参加。
Greetings to you all. Thank you very much for coming to our third webinar on the sustainable management and use of wild species and agricultural and husbandry ecosystems. A brief introduction on our platform for Africa-China CSOs dialogue. Many of you might have joined us for the first time. This platform, the full name is the Platform for Africa-China CSOs Dialogue on Biodiversity Conservation. Our purpose is that we can get more than 60 NGOs and CSOs together from both China and Africa to exchange our views on biodiversity conservation and also demonstrate our best practices in the conservation work. Some of the case studies and success stories, and we believe that is beneficial for us to mutually learn from each other and understand what are some of the good methodologies in this very important area of work. On that, we have already hosted 2 webinars, and on each of the previous webinar, we had 2 Chinese expert speakers and 2 expert speakers from Africa. And we have a different agenda for each of the webinar, and all discussions would surround those topics. Today is the 3rd webinar in the series, and we again have 4 expert speakers. The introductions of the speakers will be done by Dr. Jin Tong as she moderates our session. From the China side, our organization is called CSABC. It's a coalition of CSOs in it has 8 members, including my own organization, GEI. We now have 67 NGOs based in China, NGOs and CSOs on this platform. And we work together to improve the level of participation of the civic society in China and build up momentum for COP15 that's going to be held later in China. And we want to be increasing the level of cooperation, and hopefully we will be able to contribute to the targets. In terms of Africa, we have the African CSO organization that's similar to ours, that's ACBA, founded in 2020, and they've got the aim to protect the natural environment and biodiversity in Africa, as well as the natural heritage on the continent, and also contribute to the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So these 2 platforms actually are very much in line in their aims and missions, and we have been working together to share case studies and have dialogues on a much wider scope to exchange our positions and our ideas and thoughts on this topic. And we join hands in providing recommendations to the post-2020 framework. And it is our hope that everyone on this platform will work towards increasing the level of civic participation in our respective environments. Let me now introduce you to our moderator today. We have from TNC, the science director, Dr. Jin Tong. Dr. Jin Tong is a senior and well-known expert in biodiversity conservation. She has participated in the work of many NGOs, international organizations, and hosted many international events. She conducts research in this area as well. And for CSABC and for the other NGO coalitions, she has been a founding member as well as a very proactive participant. She is going to moderate the rest of the session, and I will wrap up my intros at this point. And hopefully through the 4 case studies we share today, we can learn from each other, and we welcome any questions from you all. The floor is now given to Dr. Jin Tong. Thank you very much, Dr. Peng Kui, for those kind words of introduction. Thank you to the organizers for the invitation to come and work as the moderator for this third webinar in the series. The topic today, as you can see, is sustainable management and use of wild species in agricultural husbandry ecosystems towards human well-being and an ecosystem service-based economy. If you have a look at the case studies shared on the 2 previous webinars, you will notice that the topics of the first 2 webinars is actually how we can better mobilize the society, the general society, to protect biodiversity. So we focused on conservation work itself, but you can also see that the CBD actually has 3 main topics. Biodiversity conservation, sustainable utilization, as well as sharing of natural resources. And so these are very important topics as well. And today we're going to talk about this very important topic. And we've invited 4 practitioners and experts from both China and Africa to share with us their cases and examples, and let us know how we can better sustainably manage and share the use of wild species and other ecosystem functions. I would like to talk to you a little bit about our agenda today. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have the great pleasure of inviting 4 speakers to our webinar today, and we have 2 sessions of presentations, and each will have 1 expert from China and Africa. They each have 15 minutes to present on their cases, and then we'll have a 10-minute question and answer session. In that process, our team will be collecting questions from the chat, from the audience members, and after that we go into the second session. Again, we'll have 1 Chinese and 1 African expert, again followed by Q&A. And so before the start of today's webinar, we have some household rules. The first of which is please mute your microphone unless you're speaking. And in the process, please make sure that you're muted throughout the meeting. And once speakers finish talking, you can indicate that to your moderator and indicate that you're finishing up your speech. And this would actually be beneficial to improving the efficiency of the discussion. And in that process, we would also welcome any questions and comments from our audience members in the chat window. And our team members will collect the questions you have left in the chat window. If you wanted to raise the question verbally, please raise your hand using the raise hand button. After the sharing of our experts, we will have a Q&A session. We have audience members and speakers from different countries and regions. Today, we're going to provide English, French, and Chinese simultaneous interpreting. As you come into the conference room, you will be able to choose the channel of your preference at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, we will now go straight into the first session. It is our great presenter and senior researcher who represent Africa Conservation Center. He works in Kenya in biodiversity conservation for many years, and also as a member of the council. He's one of the main authors for the Habitat Protection Report, and he's going to share with us a case in Kenya and introduce to us as major infrastructure projects are carried out, how environment and biodiversity assessments are being done, and how the local communities' views are being respected. Our Chinese speaker in this session is from Jishou University of China. She is a professor and she works in areas of eco-ethnic studies, and she's going to share with us her findings in research on benefit sharing of genetic resources of forest and grain intercropping. So the floor is now given to Dr. Tobias for his presentation. Dr. Tobias, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you so much. Are you going to share my slides from your end?
I can if you prefer, because
Sure.
Just to, because it's not always easy to catch 100% when to move on to the next slide. When you finish, if you'll just tell me next slide, I'll go ahead and move to the next slide.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that.
No worries. So so I see Dr. Pang has stopped sharing. Let me go ahead and open your PowerPoint.
So Dr. Tobias is going to be sharing his own screen, or Sharon's going to do it for him. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, from wherever you're joining us. I'm so glad to be here today, and thank you for giving us this audience. Today, I'm going to talk briefly about community participation in a very important process of environmental and social accountability when it comes to the initiation and implementation of development projects, particularly in the Global South. And with a specific case to Kenya, where we've had a major infrastructure project, excuse me, a major infrastructure project called the Standard Gauge Railway. And in this forum, it then brings two countries together, that is China and Kenya, as China supported this project via a 90% loan from the China Exim Bank, and Kenyan government supported it as well. And we've got all the civil society organizations that were involved in this process in one way or the other, either through supporting it or raising concerns where necessary. As you've been told, I think my name is Tobias Nyumba. I'll not repeat that. Let's move to the next slide. Just proceed. Next. Good. So basically, when we talk about the public, and in this case, public participation, it's also important to understand who are the public, because this is one area that has been so gray, in the sense that we believe when the government officials, particularly those in the National Assembly, make certain decisions, then we believe that they do so on behalf of the said public. And therefore, decisions around the investment in the Standard Gauge Railway were actually made within the National Assembly and within the government structures, and therefore it is believed it was done in the interest of the public. So the first thing is really to get to know who is the public. And of course, I'll give more or less a theoretical understanding of what it is, which is basically a natural or legal persons, a collection of numerous continually shifting interests and alliances. So we then look at it from the perspective of human beings, but also their interests or ideologies and what they believe in. In this case, we think about collection of people, but also if we talk about the conservation organizations, development institutions, what they believe should drive sustainable development or resilient development then constitutes that community or that public group that is involved in that. Much of this basically tries to give more or less a background as to what really might constitute that, including values that people believe in, what really drives their interests, what supports their economy and the likes. But also another word that has been used quite a lot interchangeably is the stakeholders. And therefore, in most of the public participation or public projects, you will hear people talk about stakeholder engagement, or not all the stakeholders were involved. And so it's also important to understand who the stakeholders are. And in this case, it's basically a component of the wider public, but they are literally those with a stake in that issue, either directly or indirectly. And this might include the non-governmental organizations, the government or its agents, the industry, or the individuals or communities, amongst others. The beauty about stakeholders is that they might not necessarily be living in the same vicinity of a project. but they are people who might be living elsewhere in China, in the US, in the UK, but they keep a tab on what is happening around an issue or a project on the ground. They might not make direct comments, but they want to know how things are happening around that project. Next slide. Now, the issue of public participation is quite critical, particularly when it comes to projects like the SGR. And this is particularly because these projects really tend to affect the livelihoods of the locals. So you find a situation where the donors, governments, international organizations, and most of the institutions really advocate for participatory approaches when it comes to integrating people's knowledge, for instance, as the basis for planning and also as the basis for change. Now, this is driven by the fact that when you introduce some of these activities, they are supposed to directly impact on people's well-being and their livelihoods, their ways of life, and their social structures. So if their input and their awareness and understanding of their surroundings is not incorporated, then you have a situation where we introduce certain values and certain new practices that don't conform with the ways of life. In the case of Kenya, the government, through the new constitution 2010, really entrenched this. And this has been achieved through various structures like the county governments, where we have got participatory budgets, participatory planning, all the communities are involved through the wards, which are representatives who then communicate clearly with the local communities through forums such as the one we are seeing on the picture. For the sake of the environment, then we've got the Environmental Management and Coordination Act 99 that has also been reviewed and amended in 2015, and it also advocates for public participation through its social and environmental impact assessment. The purpose is to ensure that an opportunity is accorded to communities and would be beneficiaries of those who might be impacted upon by these projects to really understand what some of those impacts might look like, and also to be given an opportunity to decide whether they are willing to accommodate those impacts or they are not willing, and therefore reject the project outright. But as we will see, there might be some loopholes that have actually not been sealed and that might need some addressing. Civil societies in Kenya are quite vibrant, as you might have learned, and they have really tried to hold the government accountable when it comes to environmental and social impact assessment and accountability, and they have supported the public in different ways through trainings and facilitation to really understand their place when it comes to social and environmental impact assessment and their participation. Let's continue. So when it comes to the development projects, public participation in development projects, we have a problem in the sense that, as I mentioned, most of the decisions are made at the top level government positions and also in the houses of representative. And the assumption then is that they are doing all this on behalf of the public. In our case, then, we believe that when the public is adequately involved, then this will be success in the implementation of these projects as trust and reduce conflicts, but it also enhances trust, and because they are not, then there's going to be a problem. In the case of Kenya now, again, like I mentioned, public participation is not only in the constitution, but it's also in the MCA. And MCA advocates for environmental impact assessment for all the major projects that really are supposed to be undertaken in the country. And this is done through, not just the local regulations, but also international legal instruments and conventions that also really advocate for public participation to ensure that their well-being is safeguarded when these projects are implemented, as I've enumerated down there. Next slide. So what and human environment of a particular geographical area. In other words, it's got to be very specific, very incisive, and really there's always the tendency to focus on the negative. But now we realize there's also need for the positive. And that's why I say the community then needs to be aware that they have choices. They have positives and negatives and can make a decision on how much of the positives they can discount. I mean, how much of the negatives they can discount on the account of the positives. If we only highlight the positives and don't highlight the negatives, then we end up not giving full information. And therefore, the identification, prediction, and evaluation and mitigation of both social and ecological impacts of those projects then becomes a problem. The tool therefore gives the decision makers in Kenya, the National Environment and Management Authority, an opportunity to make decisions whether to give a green light to the project to go ahead or not, or to demand some redesigning of those projects. So you can see clearly there's a very clear opportunity there, and the diagram on the other side of your screen really accounts for where and when the public needs to participate in the process of the environmental and social impact assessment. And you can clearly see it's actually not clear at what stage they stop. We are called upon to engage them from the very beginning to the very end. And in this case, the very end means that continuous evaluation and monitoring of these impacts and ensuring that they are being minimized. Next. Good. So I've just talked about the standard gauge railway, and I think we all now appreciate that this was a very important project for the Kenyan government as a flagship project that fits into the wider Vision 2030 development agenda. And for the African continent, it fits within the Agenda 2063, and therefore really plays a bigger role. But then in our collaboration with the Chinese counterparts, it then fits into the bigger Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically supposed to provide that global connectivity. Therefore, the investment in the SGR wasn't a lost cause, but it was a very essential component of development that needed to be supported. It then became the biggest transport infrastructure in the country, only second to the lunatic lane that was constructed earlier on by the British government. It was meant to provide seamless connectivity across the region and continent. As usual, there has been some complaints, particularly the emphasis was laid on the economic development and economic benefit. The dollar sign was the emphasis, but the environmental and social impacts were actually not accounted for. And that's why you'll hear people say the entire construction began before the environmental impact assessment was completed. There was the need to ensure that the opportunity for trade and investment wasn't lost at the expense of taking care of the environment. But that came with devastating consequences that is not the scope of today's presentation, but I think it's very important to mention. So the evidence so far indicates that, of course, environmental impact assessment was done, as you can see from the two documents on the other side of the screen. But a clear assessment of what we've done through the Under the Development Corridors Partnership really gives conflicting dates of those assessments vis-a-vis when the SGR construction began. So there's always the question of which one came first, and that's why we might be grappling some of these impacts. The pictures at the bottom are all pictures taken to give evidence of public participation. The process of arriving at that might be questionable, but at least something was done as per the law, and those documents are there to support those claims. Next. So clearly, over time, you could see that there's been a lot of controversy. Opinion is divided on how effective public participation was done. So across the country, you've seen a lot of media complaints, or rather captured scenes of people demonstrating here and there, documents protesting this, court sessions trying to stop different construction processes. But on the other side, there are also those who really feel the project was worth the investment. And as like I mentioned, this assessment is based purely on the economic consideration. There is a thought that, it has an opportunity to improve Kenyans' fortunes, but also it has an opportunity to expand Kenya, or rather access to Kenyan market to other countries. So those are things that really, bring a lot of controversies amongst participants from different sectors. But of course, I think there's a lot of judgment out there to decide whether those are true or not. Our concern today is basically on the participation of public in that process that might have or not led to these protests. Next. So specifically, to address these controversies, then we set out as the Development Corridors Partnership to try and evaluate really what might have happened or not to ensure that this process was as participatory as is envisaged in both the Constitution as well as the EIA guidelines. And therefore, we ask questions about the process and how it was done in practice on the ground, vis-a-vis the recommended process that is engraved in the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, but also compared with the international best practices and principles. How are the two tallying, and what is the public thinking about this process, and how has that then affected their acceptance of the reports that have been established and support for the project? Next. So to do that, we went out to the field, obviously, and spoke with people. So the map really shows the alignment of the area, with the circles in red showing where we stopped and spoke with communities, we made observations, but also we conducted key informant interviews with different institutions that are based out in the field. We also had interviews with institutions in Nairobi. So the other bit of it is just the development to avoid, polluting the same environment via paper printing that we were trying to avoid. So then in a nutshell, we really visited these places and spoke with communities and practitioners to get their views on what really happened during the process. Next. So some of our key findings that really prompted us to look beyond our noses was that despite the fact that the EIAs were conducted and the recommendations were given to mitigate some of those impacts, clearly there was serious impacts going, happening on the ground. We could observe those. See that, different components of the social and ecological systems were impacted differently, from water resources, land use and land resources were also impacted, but most importantly, biodiversity. As you'd realize, I think we all now appreciate that the SGR really traversed some of the critical and biodiversity-rich ecosystems in the country, particularly the Tsavo Conservation Area and the Nairobi National Park and its ecosystems. And these are very fragile ecosystems that require meticulous protection, but also if investment must be done there, it has to be done in a very eco-sensitive manner. So a lot of things that happened there, from people illegally constructing houses now. If you drive down to Mombasa, for instance, just past a Voi, between the SGR and the Mombasa-Nairobi highway, you will come across new settlements that have emerged there. They have even constructed permanent houses, and yet those are critical migratory routes for elephants and other wildlife within that ecosystem. Now, this has been encouraged by the attractions to use some of those infrastructure and access market by the people. We are really concerned that those were really not envisaged when the EIAs were conducted, because there wasn't thorough consultation with the people who have been involved in long-term conservation and planning in that ecosystem. In terms of this critical ecological areas, a very obvious thing that we've observed along the entire SGR, particularly on the embankments, is the emergence of invasive plant species. That has also happened a lot within Nairobi National Park. We've not been able to strictly associate that to the construction of the SGR, but based on the previous experiences and lessons learned elsewhere, we can create kind of association. Beyond that, movement of wildlife, particularly elephants, has really been impaired, because they are not making good use of the underpasses in those areas because they have been blocked. And so these are critical things that might have been identified if at all communities were involved adequately. Next. So specifically in terms of public participation in this, public awareness, or rather public preparedness and capacity building, and knowledge on whether or not they need to participate in environmental governance. And that's a question that the civil society needs to really grapple with to ensure capacity is built adequately. I think with specific reference to the EIA, for these projects, again, you see the number is pretty high, meaning there's a lot of exclusion. And in some of the places we had conversations with some of the key informers, there was a question of the people they call professional public participation individuals. These are individuals who will always participate in every public gathering in different areas, regardless whether they are locals from those locations. And they do this for their own benefits, not for the benefit of the environment and the local communities. So that kind of elite capture has really permeated the process of the EIA, and there are individuals who are known to be professional participants. Those are things that really take away the responsibility and the benefits from the local communities and might need to really be taken into account and addressed in good time. Next. So at what stage really were the public involved? Again, in line with that general lack of understanding and appreciation of the indigenous knowledge and local community awareness, most of the participants really said they were involved at the scoping and the pre-feasibility study. Now, this is considered as the very basic impacts, and therefore majority really were involved at the very first stage. This is quite easy because the consultants can easily walk into communities and talk to people and get their views. So somebody is aware that I was asked a question sometime. See, beyond the scoping and pre-feasibility, the participation of community diminishes quite drastically from 74 down to 12%. Now that's a serious issue for concern. And that perhaps explains really why the support for these projects diminishes immediately they start construction. They waited to be told the next steps, and those groups rushed, but it also happened, as I said, that wasn't appropriate at all. Next, and updated on what is being planned. They were being told what has been planned, but they were not being asked for their views on what really they need to understand. There was only opportunity to provide information about the benefits of this project that has been planned and how community will get employment, how society, how they will get opportunities to be working there as laborers. But we were never told that after the construction, there would be some blockage of your movements, your livestock won't be able to go to the other places, but also there will be dispersal of for instance, wildlife into community that might cause conflict. So in our overall assessment of that process of community engagement and capacity building was very poor. Number two, the process of engaging them more. Because of resource constraints, we established that the consultants really decided to go for the easy picks. The people they could easily call. It was, initiated and implemented, but most so the fact that most decisions, and therefore here is a question of public participation in public education and awareness, in tandem with the EIA framework. Last. So of course, those are the partners that we have in the project under the development corridors partnership. And thank you so much for your time. And I hope we are able to engage going forward. Thank you.
It's very 这些案例是可以非常好的作为借鉴来分享给我们的非洲伙伴的。然后接下来呢，可能我们的这个周洪果周教授会从另外一个角度来为我们分享在中国 开展这种终端性遗传资源会议分享。
To us about a case in China on the sharing of genetic resources, and this is intercropping between crops and trees. You have 15 minutes, please go ahead. Please share my screen. Sharon, can you please share Dr. Zhou's slides?
Sure. Just opening that up now.
I'll be able to do it myself as well. Okay, I'll be sharing the slides. Thank you. I would like to also remind our speakers and audience members in the process of her presentation, if you have any questions, please type them out in the chat window, or you can send it to Wang Qian or Qiaojia directly. We will be able to get to the questions after Professor Zhou's presentation. Good morning to our African friends and good afternoon to our domestic friends. Thank you very much to the organizer for providing me with an opportunity to share our case. This case is based in Jingxing County, and in 2019, we've led a team to work on this project, and it is in relation to the intangible heritage in this area. So the background of the genetic resources of agroforestry, I would like to talk about its background. The first area is ecological background. The Qingshui River Basin is situated in the southwest of China with a lot of mountains, forests, and less farmland, and has a rich biodiversity. In this area, we have a lot of cedar trees, and the cheddar trees actually have a very good quality, and that is the eco background to the program. From the mid to late, after Beijing has become the capital, the imperial palace need to be built in China, and there is a great demand for and in this area, the imperial court had then commandeered a lot of this wood and timber. And this also happened in the modern stage when there is a drive of the development in the nation as well as the demand in the market. This region had been continuing along its lines to grow the trees in this area. And another part of the social background is along the Qingshui-Jiang River region. It is actually a cohabitat region for a few ethnic minorities. And these few ethnic minorities also have a very big demand on the timber. These photos are typical ancient structures by these ethnic minorities. And you can see the right-hand photo. This is the residential building built by these ethnic minority, and you can see it uses a lot of timber as well. Can we please ask the other people to mute your microphones, please? And so these buildings are usually built with timber that is more than 50 years of age, and the agricultural community locally will use that wood to build the roofs to their buildings as well. Like I said, the ethnic minorities, including the Miao people, the Dong people, and the Yi people, they maintain a very high level of demand on this high quality timber. And they also would build the barns for their cattle using the same wood. So based on that, really became the reason why timber and forestry related industry is very advanced, and also because of the food demand, the limited farmland is also taken to use as crop growing land. So there has been a way to organically intercrop both the timber trees for timber as well as the agricultural crop for food. And so this actually is the reason why there has been the genetic resources of agroforestry that dates back to nearly 400 years ago. Like we said, the history of this industry has started by the mid to late Ming Dynasty and has lasted until today. So those are the background information for this project. How should we understand this intercropping practice? The forestry production focuses on the cheddar trees, mainly on this one species. As we know, these are deciduous trees, and we also have other trees with wider leaves. And we also use the land under the trees for agricultural production, for crop and grains. Like we said, we also have different types of tree species, and crop also meant many different types of crop, such as for food and for vegetables and other agricultural cash crops, as well as the breeding of animal and insects. Next, I would like to present you with a specific case to demonstrate how intercropping is achieved. So like we said, we have the cheddar trees, and we also have millets. Millet is actually a very typical grain crop for this region. We can see from the ancient literature for this area where millet and cheddar wood had been intercropped for more than hundreds of years. And we know the millet crop actually likes a basic soil. It doesn't like acidic soil, and it also likes to grow in the shade, which makes it an ideal crop to be grown under the trees, and it doesn't mind where the sunlight is being blocked by the taller trees. And there are also, of course, scientific grounds for choosing these different types of crop. And so this is actually a very typical intercropping of two species. And then you can see that we have these young saplings, and we also have the crop being grown next to it in a row. So we have cheddar wood and tobacco intercropping and cheddar wood pepper intercropping. We mentioned insects and animals. So now we have cheddar wood mixed with other types of trees, including the eucalyptus, as the forest intercropping. And then we have the Ericeros pella cavernus, which is also a very old insect in the Chinese history. This photo is of me in April talking with the local farmer, and you can see the little bulbs on the tree branches, and that's where the insect laid its eggs. So they would actually farm these insects. So as we mentioned, you can see intercropping between cheddar wood trees as well as other cash crop and other types of crop for grains. There are many similar examples, but I'm only showing you a few of those. I can now show you some of the outcomes of the intercrop. So we have the upland rice, we have millet, which we were talking about, and we have the insect wax that was produced by the insect we talked about. And we have a Ganoderma lucidum, which is actually a very precious fungi that grows in Chinese forests, are considered to have very high medicinal value. And so we have now been looking at the cultural and historic background in this area, where we can see out of different considerations, people have been using intercropping practices between cheddar wood, other types of timber wood, as well as crop. And you can see usually the intercropping happens between the first 3 to 5 years of the cheddarwood's life. And then we change the one-dimensional forest into a multi-dimensional agricultural organic system where we can have multiple tiers of production, including the flora and fauna. And this makes the ecosystem a lot more stable. So we would be able to provide a lot more value. So we talked about how as we achieve intercropping, there is also an enriched biodiversity. So we provide eco, cultural, and economic value. We talked about biological value, where there is a coexistence and mutual benefits for multiple species. For example, when you have different tree species grown together, this would block insects and pests from spreading across from one line of trees to the other line of similar trees. And also with the multi-layered ecosystem, we'll be able to fully utilize the sun, the geothermal, the water, and the soil resources. And this actually adjusts and also improves the local microclimate and provides a very important ecological barrier. And this photo is actually the Jinping area where intercropping was at its best practice. With economic value, not just, of course, in the value of the timber itself, it also demonstrates in the different high value agricultural products, including the millet, which sells at 15 to 18 yuan per half a kilogram. And they can be fermented and made into liquor. There is tea oil produced from the tea plants. And we have very premium nut oil, the walnut oil from the wild walnuts. The very precious fungi we talked about, it is sold at a very good price for 150 to 200. It is also sold at a very, very high price. And so for the local farming community, this is a very healthy and strong income source. In terms of the cultural value, on the left-hand photo, you can see because of the rich timber resources, it actually demonstrates the local culture. So you will be able to see the ethnic household buildings being embraced by the forest and by the hill. It also demonstrates the agricultural art system without the very rich endowment of the cheddar wood. And very enriched community or a collection of cultural, economic, and biological value. And we do need to think of them as a whole. Before we were to actually means there is a set of characteristics. On one hand, we would nickel of production. This is because timber wood trees usually need a valuable timber, and this requires the support based on the current situation today. So I won't go into benefit share I personally believe that candidate into joy to realize interest in their respective forest farms, and they would then be able to contribute in this area cash bank. And we believe this is Jane Bank. Architectural culture, the cuisine, as well as part of the cultural gene bank value in this local area. So different environment and different soil and terrain. So we need to think of each of these different locations as an individual case, and on a case-by-case basis, we find out a way to best utilize the available ecological and biological as well as economic resources so that we can maximize the benefit to both the communities locally as well as to the other living forms. And we need to think of these individual regions as a specific target and design and develop these systems based on their own circumstances. This would also help the local communities to become more tight-knit and for them to become more proactive in protecting their own environment. This will help the sustainability and resilience for the local cultures, the local economy, and local biodiversity. Thank you very much. The floor is given back to the moderator. Thank you very much, Professor Zhou, for those wonderful words. This is actually a very typical example of how traditional knowledge and traditional culture can be used to provide economic and social and biological value even today. And from all of these areas, these types of best practices can provide a lot of value. So we thank Professor Zhou very much for demonstrating to us in such a comprehensive manner this best case practice. Now we go into the question, answer, and discussion period in session 1. As Professor Zhou was sharing the case, people have questions on Dr. Tobias' presentation. As Professor Zhou was speaking, people might not be able to raise the questions yet because they were so focused on the presentation itself. So we seeing Dr. Tobias answering some of the questions. Perhaps he would answer 1 or 2 questions that he hasn't answered already. And if you have questions regarding Professor Zhou's presentation, feel free to leave your questions in the chat window. We'll try to get to those questions later. Because we only have 10 minutes at this session, you can continue to leave your questions. And if the questions, we didn't get to the questions, we can answer them later on. A very quick question Dr. Peng Hui was asking, for the SGR project, has it been built by a Chinese contractor or Chinese company?
Yes, the SGR has been built by a Chinese contractor called China Road and Bridge Corporation, which is a state-owned enterprise in China. So they brought in all the expertise and facilitated the process, but they did that in collaboration with the local partner, the Kenya Railways Corporation.
Very well in this area. I think it is a very typical sort of cooperation between China and Africa. And this is again in itself a very important topic, and perhaps we can have further discussions on other platform, on other opportunities on this platform, where we can see how civic societies work together between China and Africa, and see how these international large-scale infrastructure projects can improve the level of public participation. A question from Yami.
Sorry, I lost you. I don't know if I didn't hear your question, but I can read it from the screen, obviously. I think Yemi's question is quite on point and quite timely. I think the CSOs have been known to have a lot of influence. They have a lot of resources. They have a lot of a huge network of different organizations, but also they have a huge international outreach. The only thing that I see lacking is the perception that the CSOs, especially the conservation CSOs, are considered to be anti-development, and it's a tag that we've really fought in Kenya, particularly when at the time of the SGR construction, where we were dismissed as anti-development, people who just want to maintain the status quo. And so what we've done, for instance, under the Development Corridors Partnership, is to try and engage with the government institutions or the implementing organizations from the beginning. They might not have the data, they might not have the experience and the lessons learned elsewhere, but if we engage in a respectful manner, there are opportunities that we will be listened to, and we can give directions as to how these things happen. The challenge we've had for a long time is the CSOs have been seen to be, professional bodies that want things done their way, and we must shed off that tag and have CSOs that appear not to be government friendly per se, but they work together with the government to support these projects in an inclusive, sustainable, and resilient manner. I think that's the only way to go forward. We cannot be seen to be working parallel to each other. There must be some kind of interactions between the two sets of institutions.
A follow-up question. We talked about the research by Dr. Tobias, some of the recommendations. Will these recommendations be used in the decision-making in SGR, and what role does it play?
I think we cannot really influence the current decisions on SGR because it's been constructed, it's been finished, it's actually being utilized now. Our intention is to ensure that future development projects are not done in the way that the present ones were done. And this is because the construction of the SGR and indeed many other current infrastructure are quite new in this ecosystem, and therefore we do not have baseline information or experience to ensure that they were done differently, but it has provided us great lessons to learn on how not to do things going forward. So in terms of how this information might reach the government institutions I've just mentioned, that we try to encourage working together with these government institutions like the Kenya Railways Corporation, the National Highways Authority, and all other infrastructure institutions without looking at them as development-oriented and we are conservation-oriented. We try to bridge the gap and ensure that our recommendations find a place. Now, one way we did this was to have a stakeholder workshop at the beginning of the project to ensure that our research was need-driven. So we had presentations from different institutions highlighting what they would want to see come out. And so we believe that whatever we've established really will find a niche in those organizations in a way that they would be able to implement them without necessarily being seen as they are being pushed from an external institution.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tobias. There is another question about investors. In these major infrastructure projects, will the investors have innate environmental protection mechanisms to make sure their loans will not result in negative environmental impacts?
Sorry. That's a very good question. And I think the challenge we've had is that the investors have not really been environmentally conscious for quite some time, particularly the ones that are supporting government projects. In the private sector, I think there's been a lot of accountability. If you look, for instance, at the International Finance Corporation, the World Bank, they have incorporated some of these requirements within their structures and within their systems of loan acquisition and support. But the public institutions have actually lagged behind. And of course, we would understand because these institutions are governed by different laws, and the process of incorporating these really take a bit of time. So what we are advocating for now is to see how these financing institutions can then start engaging in best practices by demanding for a full list of environmental impacts and mitigation measures put in place to ensure that is done. It's not yet taken root, but it's something that we believe can be done if we are able to demonstrate the financial risks they suffer. I'll give you an example. Part of the Mombasa road that was constructed using loans without considering the future environmental impacts, a bypass called Dongokundu in Mombasa, fell apart in December last year and blocked the entire circuit. The reason it did was that the entire road embankment really caved in the face of heavy rains. So the financiers didn't incorporate climate projections, the geologic formations, and they didn't even think about the value of the mangroves that were really holding that soil together, and they facilitated the removal of that entire vegetation. The impact was that the soil became loose, there was no protection, and when it rained heavily, that entire section collapsed. We saw the same with the SGR around Savo and around Suswa, where, not Suswa, sorry, but Ngong Forest, where sections really collapsed in the face of heavy rains. So the financiers then have got to go an extra mile in repairing what they could have avoided from the very beginning. So what we're trying to demonstrate to them is there is a lot of savings that you can incur if you become responsible and understand the interactions between nature and the development projects from the very beginning. And we believe that is the way to go.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tobias. We have a question for Professor Zhou. Do we have, in China, do we have laws and regulations that we can follow for the benefit sharing mechanism for intercropping? This question is rather big. What I would like to say at this point is, in China, the administration of forest resources has been very strict, and now it's relatively relaxed. And also this differs from the north of China to south of China. In the past, there has been a universal ban on the logging. For the southern areas of China, because of the climate and because of the soil nature, usually the trees, it would take the trees 25 years to grow into mature timber. If it continue to grow after 25 years, the value would decrease. So the best time to log the trees will be when they reach 25 years of age. And this means we can actually log the cheddar wood reaching that age. This would, on the one hand, avoid the loss of value, and on the other hand, provide space for new saplings to be planted. So there has been some slow reform in the local laws and regulation, such as in our project location, Jinping County. They're looking for ways to maximize the forest resources, because at the moment, forests belong to the government, but the resources on it, on the forest land, belong to the government and belong to the nation, but the trees or the forest resources on top of the land belong to private ownership. And so this county will be taken as a pilot region to test out some of the reformed regulations to maximize economic and social benefits. And we can also learn from our ancestors, because like I said, in this region, intercropping has been in practice for centuries, and we should be able to learn a lot from our traditional inhabitants of this area. I will use my privilege as a moderator. I actually have a small question following up. You mentioned intercropping, and a lot of the traditions have been in practice for centuries, and it is intricately linked to the local culture. So in today's economic system, and in today's big backdrop of economic development, social development, do you think the local culture is facing a lot of impact, or in other words, how can we better conserve and preserve the traditional culture? Is there things that we can do in this area? Actually, when we talk about intercropping, it is actually an agricultural practice that is very much in line with the natural environment. Targeting the mountainous regions in this southern region of China, you can't really apply large-scale mechanical agricultural production. It really needs a lot of manual work because of the terrain. And currently, with the market demand, more and more young and strong laborers have been attracted into the cities, and you don't have enough people who are remaining in these regions to work on these farms and these forests. For example, in the past, when we grow crop for food, we would grow a certain crop, but now, because of the market demand, we would use the same and limited land resources on high value economic crops or cash crops. And so how are we going to maintain the tradition, such as in the types of grains that we plant in these areas? We're bringing that to the attention of the local community for them to make decisions as to how they can better preserve their culture. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have other questions regarding Professor Zhou's presentation. Because of the time constraint, we will, for the moment, wrap up the Q&A. We'll go to the second session, and some of the outstanding questions can be answered after the second session. So thank you very much, Dr. Tobias, and thank you very much, Professor Zhou, for the wonderful presentations. Let us now move to the second session. Again, we have two wonderful presenters, one coming from China, the other coming from Africa. Our first speaker is Madame Jensen from South Africa. She represents an organization called Resource Africa. She's the CEO of the organization, and she is native to South Africa, a senior consul, and also has a lot of knowledge and over 15 years of experience in indigenous rights, land rights, and the sharing and distribution of benefits. She is going to speak to us on indigenous communities and also the sharing of local flora. And our Chinese speaker is a coordinator of the Farmers Seed Network of China, which is an organization that works in Yunnan, Guangxi, Sichuan, and Jiangsu provinces. They work with the local eco farms and local farming communities to make sure that they would conduct environmentally friendly seed activities, including seed banks and so on and so forth, as well as the protection of local biodiversity. He will speak to us on a series of projects that they have worked on and share with us their experience. The floor is first given to Madame Jensen from South Africa.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm happy to have listened to all the important discussions and case studies between our colleagues. Yes, I'm going to share a benefit sharing case, which from the Khoi community, which is the traditional knowledge holders to an indigenous plant species from South Africa. And this is a benefit sharing in the case of, in the context of Nagoya Protocol. So I look forward to sharing this work. I'm just struggling with my presentation a bit. Sorry for that. My apologies, Sharon, can I ask you to put it up for me? Thanks. So yeah, this benefit sharing case has been ongoing for the last 8 years, and it's been coming on since 2012. I would just at this stage ask Sharon if you don't mind sharing. Thank you. Yeah, before I actually get to the case, I'm from an organization called Resource Africa. Next slide. And Resource Africa is an organization based in South Africa, and they support communities involved in community-based natural resource management, situated across Southern Africa in 9 Southern Africa countries. It holds decades of experience around influencing environmental policy at all levels, undertaking different international advocacy activities that is supposed to support rights-based approaches in regards to Resource Africa. It mainly works at 3 levels: local level, national level, as well as international level. Thank you. Next slide. So yeah, I will be sharing this case called the Rooibos case, famously known as the Rooibos case. It is a case that is really where these over 40 indigenous communities in South Africa, which is the Khoi and San communities, aim to bring about a form of restitution for them as it pertains to an endemic plant species from South Africa called Rooibos. And this is a case that spans a decade-long journey, in fact, because this case started off with Nestlé at the time that wanted to register certain patents around the Rooibos and honeybush plant species in South Africa. And there was a massive campaign to actually stop these illegal patents that Nestlé at the time wanted to register. Eventually, within this 8-year period, I will just set out the different stages. And then in 2014, Nestlé, in terms of the South African division, came forward, and they then offered in a very different way, entered into a benefit sharing agreement with the Khoi and San communities as the traditional knowledge holders to a plant species. And with the Nestlé company, the South Africa division, they then entered into a benefit sharing agreement for a particular red cappuccino project that Nestlé at the time developed. That first benefit sharing around the Rooibos agreement then was the catalyst for these over 40 indigenous communities in South Africa to then start a over 5-year journey from 2014 to ensure that they get the South African Rooibos industry to enter into a benefit sharing agreement to recognize them as the traditional knowledge holders to the users of Rooibos. And this was the very first industry-wide benefit sharing agreement that was then put in place, which was the first contract of its kind in South Africa. That was part of the first case in the context of the Nagoya Protocol that was concluded. Currently the community is in a post benefit sharing contract period where they are now in a sense trying to organize themselves to set up community trusts and local governance arrangements for benefit distribution. It is quite a big process, and it is equally big process as they were busy trying to get the industry to share benefits. From that process, they've then went on to organize themselves in a Rooibos, what would be a form of a bylaw, but it's called the Biocultural Community Protocol, which is a community tool for consent, which Nagoya Protocol recognizes, as well as the South African National Framework. So this really, in overview, is the different key stages of how these communities had to go about to establish their right as traditional knowledge holders to the users of Rooibos, enabling them to secure a generational benefit sharing levy from the Rooibos industry based on them sharing the first knowledge to the users of Rooibos. Next slide. Yeah, that is just a picture taken at the conclusion of the signing of the Rooibos benefit sharing contract, and these were the performers at the event, because it was a massive celebration on that day. Next slide. Yeah, so who are the knowledge holders? Because this presentation is wanting to focus much more on the social justice and the environmental justice aspect of this rather than the science necessarily of the plant and so on. But the Khoikhoi community was a historical nomadic pastoralist community. Their wealth was documented in colonial times to one village owning well over 200,000 sheep. They were rich in the sense of all of these cattle, sheep that they were owning. They were roaming. Most of the different tribes was considered, or the ancestral territory was considered most of South Africa, although some seems to claim that the origin, their language, there's a historical route across Southern Africa, actually starting as far back as Tanzania. But these communities were for the last thousands of years, they do have a historical connection with this area. And this resource, rooibos of today, is found only in the Western Cape. Its natural distribution is found only in the Western Cape province that you will see up there, which is very much anchored in this community's ancestral territories. And this is one of the two communities that were the traditional knowledge holders that stepped forth and staked their claim to the resource rooibos as benefit sharing and knowledge holders. Next slide. So yes, the rooibos plant. But before I get to the rooibos plant, I wanted to just speak to the fact that the rooibos plant finds itself in the Western Cape province. It's natural, as I said, it's where it's naturally found. It's also found in what we call the Cape Floral Kingdom, which is generally a biodiverse hotspot. It hosts over 9,000 plant species, of which over 500 of those plant species are medicinal plants, and of which about 68% of it is endemic to South Africa. It has different, protected area status, World Heritage Site status, and the like. Unfortunately, these protected areas does not include the connection of these communities, the Khoikhoi and San communities' connection to these areas. These protected area spaces where a lot of these plant species are located is very much exclusionary spaces. And it is still a conversation. It's still a issue of social justice and environmental justice that is yet to be corrected, particularly in the Western Cape in South Africa. But within this context, you find this plant rooibos, which is endemic to South Africa. It only grows in the Cederberg Mountains, as I said. It is a plant known or forms the basis of a massive South African rooibos industry, tea industry. It has influenced cosmetic industries, different beverage products and related. It is also common cause that the plant holds different antioxidant properties, healing properties for different medical ailments. It is a plant which is extremely special to the Khoi and San communities, and they've walked a long road the last 8 years to ensure that they can have a form of justice for the plant, because even in the communities where they are not living on the land where the plant is naturally found, there continues to be a historical deep connection to this plant species. Next slide. So yes, the Khoi and San community in 2011, they staked a claim to the South African government, coming forth stating that they are the traditional knowledge holders to the uses of rooibos. And they said to South Africa that they expect the South African government to comply with their Nagoya Protocol obligations and ensure that there is justice to our rooibos, raw material that's being exported. And they said that rooibos, and their claim is on the basis that rooibos is an indigenous biological resource governed by our South African national framework, and that all trade in regards to rooibos and other products falling under our national framework is considered to be regarded as bioprospecting. And so they said, even though the sharing of their knowledge took place in the 17th and 18th centuries, there is no doubt that the traditional knowledge of the San and Khoi is what formed the basis of what is our medicinal and related uses of rooibos. And it was conveyed in the context of the CBD and how our national framework contextualizes bioprospecting. And they believe that those uses gave rise to what is the rooibos industry today. The Khoi and San, as the modern traditional knowledge holders, are an indigenous community in South Africa as our national framework defines it, and those traditional users have initiated or contributed to what is bioprospecting. And so their claim was that no further permit should be issued around the commercialization of rooibos until there is justice in terms of benefits towards them as the traditional knowledge holders. Next claim, next slide. And so, yes, on that basis, on November 2019, an ABS agreement was launched. They were able to secure a traditional knowledge levy, and that now brings the South African rooibos industry in compliance with their benefit sharing obligations as per South Africa's bioprospecting law, and benefits to the communities was calculated as 1.5% of what is called the farm gate price, which is the price that processors would pay to commercial farmers when they are purchasing rooibos. And this small levy of the benefits generated will then be paid to the Khoi and San communities of South Africa through the vehicle of their community trusts that we will talk a bit more further down. Next slide. So the Khoi and San communities was organized into these two different trusts. The San communities have 4 sub-communities, and the National Khoisan Council has over 40 communities that they are organized. And these two traditional knowledge holder communities formed a MOU where they agreed that they will share benefits on a 50-50 basis whenever the traditional knowledge levy will be paid over. But they also agreed that they are shared knowledge holders to at least 3 other high-value plant species, because South Africa's bioeconomy was also that they've identified is 7 plant species, and of those 7 plant species, both the Khoi and San communities has so far agreed that at least 3 of those plant species they are shared knowledge holders on too. And so they came together as these 2 historical communities, how they will put their benefit sharing arrangements in place. Next slide. So how the benefits would reach the community is step 1, the rooibos industry would pay their levy over to the South African Bioprospecting Fund. And this is administered by the South African government. And the South African government, our environmental ministry, would then distribute the benefits on a 50-50 basis to these the traditional knowledge holder communities. And I was specifically involved with the 150%, the Khoi community. And so the Khoi community, that component, they decided to share their 50% in the sense of cutting the cake, where 20% would go to the administration of their trust. 15% would go to their cultural organization that oversees their cultural affairs, and then the rest of the benefits they would then divide on a 10% basis to the different communities that comprises the Khoi community. Next slide. What what they've also done is they've also, because in their bylaw or biocultural community protocol that I referred to, they've also indicated to their communities, which, as I said, is over 40 communities. They've also set out in their bylaw how they, as a form of guidance to their communities, how they would have to go about and qualify for benefits. And why this was important is because this is a community that suffered severe disruption in terms of their own cultural identity, and they are also not recognized in South Africa. And so it was important for them to use this bylaw in the absence of being part of the formal legislative system of South Africa. It was important for them to use this bylaw as a way of also speaking to the different community members, which is they distributed quite wide across South Africa as to how they can actually access the benefits and what has been put in place in their name. It was quite a process to get there, but it was a start in the absence of legislation supporting their collective existence in South Africa. This bylaw then helped to provide some sort of direction for the community going forward. Next slide. I've mentioned earlier the biocultural community protocol. This is just a little bit about what this is. As I mentioned, it's a community tool for consent. It articulates the identity of the community. It articulates how they give consent. It articulates their relationship between them as a community and their resource. It articulates how they expect external actors to engage with communities based on their own governance systems. And then this biocultural community protocol, as I said, is included in Nagoya Protocol. It is at the treaty level recognized as a valid tool for community consent. This biocultural community protocol communities are using in various ways, whether it is in terms of defending their land against mining, whether it is to articulate their land rights, whether it is to, in various ways, they are articulating their rights and affirming their rights. But in the context of access and benefit sharing in Southern Africa, this has been used quite extensively in the case of access and benefit sharing. And so importantly, what the biocultural bylaw is doing, it is affirming and pulling together all of these laws that is affirming these communities' rights based on their own governance and their resources. And so it's not just a written document, but it's a very strong legal tool that communities are using in very interesting ways. And so this was a very important moment for the communities to, in addition to the benefit sharing agreement, to have this overarching document that pulls together all of these aspects pertaining to this resource, that their rights to the resource that they've secured. Next slide. So just as a last slide on this, I think why this particular case of rooibos was important, because as I mentioned earlier, the Khoi and San communities are still in a struggle in South Africa. They're still in a struggle for recognition. And so because they don't have recognition of their land, of their language, of their culture, of a lot of their resources, access and benefit sharing in the context of Nagoya Protocol came at a time when these communities were struggling all of these battles. And so what access and benefit sharing has allowed, it was a catalyst for them to start connecting them to their resources, to the land, and also for them to start to find a place for them in the South African national landscape. And so for them to have concluded this access and benefit sharing case around rooibos, it unlocked also their rights to the other resources, because as I mentioned earlier, South Africa is busy building their bioeconomy strategy. And here, these high value plant species, of which South Africa is planning to build a significant percentage of the economy on, these communities that are finding themselves outside of the collective rights policy framework or constitutional framework in South Africa are the knowledge holders. And so that does open up a place for them at the table in South Africa to talk about benefits and to talk about also the elephant in the room, namely land, because where the natural distribution of these high value plant species are is very much in the prime land in South Africa. And so it has really been the catalyst to start to open an important conversation and for them to start affirming their rights in ways which was in a different route from what they've been following in terms of your human rights advocacy struggles that they were engaged in. And so it has opened up this very important conversation around what does right to self-determination mean. I'm a very big advocate of access and benefit sharing because it is from a way of communities' own existence, their own stories, their own heritage. They are using access and benefit sharing to find their place at the table, to start opening those conversations with both industries and government alike, to start ensuring how do we talk benefits, how do we ensure that social justice and environmental justice do occur for communities as well. So that in short was really the case around Rooibos and how these communities called the Khoi communities was able to use Nagoya Protocol and their national policy framework to start ensuring that benefits and their rights from a resource perspective is confirmed. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Madame Jensen, for the wonderful presentation. It's actually a great presentation because when we speak about biodiversity conservation, local rights or indigenous rights is a very important topic, but very often being neglected. And today, Ms. Jensen's presentation from a very comprehensive aspect talked about how traditional culture and traditional knowledge can be respected and how this would lead to the establishment of a benefit sharing mechanism. And this is a wonderful, comprehensive and informative presentation that brings a lot of thinking to our mind. If you have questions, leave those in the chat window and let us now return to China because we have domestic examples that also demonstrate how certain resources and rights can be identified and preserved. I would like to give the floor to our Chinese presenter in this session, Mr. Li Guanqi. He will be talking about his practice from a seed organization perspective. Do you want to share your own screen or do you want us to share it for you? I can share the slides. If you can see the share screen button at the bottom of your screen, I can't find my slides.
Mr. Lee, I can share your presentation for you. It's just opening up on my end.
Good afternoon and good morning. My name is Li Guanqi. I come from FSN China. I'm a coordinator in the organization. It is my great pleasure to be sharing with you some of the work that the FSN had been doing the past 2 decades, some experience we've accumulated in China. We started from the seed nurturing and development to a wider area of work. So today I would like to talk about a progress from PPB to ABS for farmer empowerment and joint innovation. We work with our African colleagues as well. We attend an international organization, and we work with CTT, an organization in Zimbabwe, and also other African organizations, and share our mutual biodiversity conservation experience. So today I would like to first of all introduce to you our organization, the Farmers Seed Network. And secondly, I would like to share with you some of our experience. And thirdly, under a wider backdrop, some of the national network building that we have been doing that goes from farmers empowerment to joint innovation. Next slide, please. Okay, FSN China works in 3 main areas. One is the seed system enhancement, which means that the seed systems for farmers, this is based on the micro farming communities, and we work with agricultural research institutions and universities with the hope that we can bring an enhancement to the seed systems for farmers, so that farmers can know about the knowledge and they can proactively protect seed biodiversity as well as seed improvement and enhancement. And second area of work we do is capacity building and knowledge sharing. In different localities of China, we look at the local circumstances and build and advocated some of the regional networks in the East, in the Southwest, and North China region. We have had seed knowledge sharing groups and networks, and there will be routine events where we can share seeds, exchange seeds, and share knowledge. And third area of the work is in policy research and advocacy. So this is actually on top of the experience we have gained in the first 2 areas of work. We gained those knowledge and experience locally, and we would summarize that and produce policy recommendations and advocacy documents to the government. In 2015, as China proposes its seed law, we have provided our recommendation to reflect the voices of the farmers. Next slide, please. The community-based actions included a lot of content. Locally, we have a lot of supporting mechanisms for the farmers, and we work together with them on many different aspects. For example, with the seed registration, where we would comb through the seed biodiversity information in a certain community and write it down in a register where people would know clearly how many types of diversified seed there is in the community. Once we have that information, we can have targeted efforts in enhancing the seed. And it's a participated model where the experts and the farmers can work together on an equal footing. They are equal partners and will contribute equally to the enhancement of the seed. And such seed will be kept in the community. And for that, we built a community seed bank, and seed fairs were held so that such seeds can be exchanged. Traditional culture is very much linked to the seed. And in the southwest of China, we have many ethnic groups where they have a lot of traditional knowledge linked to crop growing and seed developing, and we would keep a documentation of that as well. With stakeholders, we have a diversified way of collaboration. We build platforms and host public events, release research reports and papers, and for the decision makers to find out what the farmers' demands and requirements are in developing seeds. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the past 2 decades, we have started from seeds. So we have started from one pilot program in one locality to today covering the entirety of the nation. The yellow parts on the map are the places where we have our on-the-ground projects. A lot of our cooperation partners are micro farming communities and eco farms. As we work with these partners, we explore information on seed biodiversity, seed enhancement, and seed sharing. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So on this photo, this was 20 years ago as at the beginning of our program. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Mr. Lee, if you could let me know when I'm at the correct slide.
Page 6.
Page, okay, so the slide that's numbered 6. Sorry, there isn't a slide labeled 6, but this is slide number 6. So is that the correct slide?
So you can see on the photo, this was 20 years ago. We had the China Academy of Sciences, the Guangxi Autonomous Region Academy of Sciences, and our organization. This was the earliest memory of our group. It actually is a community of farmers in the 6 regions in Guangxi Autonomous Region, as well as the scientists in agriculture. So we have been looking at the corn seed enhancement and banking. So we started from that region and started our pilot program. Next page, please. Next page, please. Yes, so with the participation of farmers, we can see that they can select the seeds and they pay attention to the diversity of the seeds, and they can maintain and keep the diversity in the seeds in their local area. In Guangxi, in the Shangula village, we can see there are a lot of different species of vegetables and melons. And they have never had a similar program where they would have a better understanding as to how many different types of seeds they have. If they didn't work on preserving the different types of seeds, they will not be able to maintain that diversity. And at the time, as we're working on this project in Guangxi, we have found that the farmers and the scientists have both invested a lot of time and effort, but because as they push the seeds to the market, the farmers would have to pay a very high price to purchase the seeds. And to the farmers, this is not reasonable and fair at all. So what we do was to support the Guangxi Academy of Sciences and had promoted a ABS sharing mechanism between the two parties so that the seed stations will authorize the farmers to use the seed they have been produced, and they can sell the seeds they produce and develop. And so after that, we can see the local farming communities built their own seed companies and gained the income from selling the seeds they have produced. So this is the photo at the signing ceremony of the sharing agreement signing. And after that, in 2006, there was a corn seed type that was authorized. And in 2013, the seed was provided to Yunnan province farmers free of charge. And the Yunnan farmers are now in the process of enhancing it. Next page, please. So the next, so we have been participating in crop improvement, and over the past few years in China, eco agriculture and organic food demand has been growing very fast. And as we protect the seed, we have started from the improvement and production of new seeds. But now, because we have a new demand, market demand, such a new demand would also ask the industry to produce new and enhanced seeds. The consumers now have a higher expectation as to the level of health and nutrition provided by the food. In order to answer to that demand raised by the consumers in the market, we have started a ecological and circular farming practice. Next page, please. There are exchanges and learnings between farmers, which we believe is very important as well. So we establish platforms and organizations, especially for farming women, for them to be able to exchange knowledge on seeds. Next page, please. Okay, this is a new project initiated in 2020. It is a joint innovation by scientists and farmers to promote ecological plant seeding and breeding. We actually have not done a lot of work in this area. We don't have a lot of organic seeds or seeds that had received organic certification. This is a gap or a blank area in the market. So we wanted to help to satisfy people's need or consumers' need on organic produce, and organic produce will need organic seeds. And so we initiated this program where we work with farming communities from around the country to promote and produce new seeds. And this was on a eco farm in Beijing, and we had a meeting with many seed scientists and the representatives of the local community. Next page, please. Another way to promote joint innovation was the seed fair. We organize such fairs so that farmers and consumers can meet each other and can exchange their ideas and knowledge on the different seeds and his seed enhancement work. And this is a great platform for people to exchange their knowledge and for the general consumer community to understand more. Next page, please. In 2020, and knowledge we accumulated over the past 2 decades and built them into training courses. In 2020, we did eco farms representatives, community leaders, as well as organizations and platforms to join in the training program. And through the training program, we wanted to export our principles and values so that farmers will be encouraged to continue to enhance seeds, keep a seed bank, and exchange and share their knowledge across the country. It has been received very warmly in Hebei province, Heilongjiang province, and in many other localities where there are trainees to our program. They have returned to their local communities and very quickly implemented their own seed banks and established their own fairs. In Beijing, we have also seen examples where the seed fairs had been hosted and farmers in the local communities have kept their seeds. Next page, please. Previous page, please. Okay, so we have had some combing through of our previous experience in starting from 2006. We have started to do a thorough research on the seed availability in China. This is an overall research report that has been published last year, and this is actually a very good report that comes through the current status and global challenges for the seed industry and some of the policy recommendations we can provide to the government. And we want to be able to, through the production of this report, make the local voices heard by the policymakers, and this would continue to advocate the reform and amendments of laws and regulations, and helping to improve the biodiversity or seed diversity levels and help more general public to understand the significance of seed protection. Next page, please. We have joined a SD equals HS project. This is an international project across different developing countries in the world, including Vietnam, Peru, Zimbabwe. We have pilot programs in these different countries, and in China, the FSN has joined as a learning partner. And we take this opportunity to share our experience with international colleagues. And as part of the program, we will continue to work with partners, especially the organization in Zimbabwe, to share our knowledge in protection of seed diversity. And in Guangxi Autonomous Region, there's going to be a further cooperation with the local credit unions and farmers syndicates so that we can look at the traditional species of the crop and see how it can be promoted in the local farming communities for them to adopt eco agricultural production and receive benefits when such produce can be sold to the consumer. In Inner Mongolia, we have also another program where we have used ecological plant breeding plus agroecology, grown millets again. And we work with the local seed enterprises to provide the local farmers with organic millet seeds so they can actually increase their income and protect the local biodiversity. Next page, please. All right, thank you very much again for the opportunity to share with you some of the things we have been doing. And we wanted to continue our work in participatory seed development. And it is my great pleasure to share with you our explorations over the past 20 years. And I look forward to hearing your comments and feedback. I look forward to working with you in the future too. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, for that sharing. 20 years is a very long time, and you have done a lot of significant work. As you were speaking, we have seen questions being posted in the chat window for our two speakers. And because you're our last presenter, we might start from you in answering questions. There is a very quick question. You mentioned in your presentation there is a report on the seed global challenge. Where can we download it? The report is only in Chinese at this stage. We are still amending the English language version. You can download the Chinese version online, and it takes a little bit of time for us to publish the English version. We have a synopsis in English that can be viewed on our official website. Very well, thank you. If you are able to, you can share the link to download the report in the chat. Another question also is one that I'm interested in. You talked about some of the traditional seed types, and you wanted to maintain and protect those traditional seeds as well. So as we develop our agriculture, we're looking at large-scale intensive farming, and there are more and more demand and growing of GMOs. So will that actually impact on your work in preserving traditional seeds? In the past 20 years of our work, every time we come into a new community and talk with the local farmers, we would actually do a research before we enter the community to find out what sort of traditional seeds there are and see whether they are disappearing. In the southwest of China, there are many traditional seeds because these areas have not been impacted by the market that much. So they've kept a lot of their traditional seeds. A lot of our work is therefore done in the southwest region of China. We can discover many traditional breeds and seeds, and we can support them, the local community, to preserve these different types. And we have also been talking about that in the Yangtze River Delta and other economically advanced regions, the consumers have a heightened demand for organic foods. And so we would support the local farming communities to grow and plant these traditional seeds so that they can receive enough incentive to continue to preserve and use the traditional seeds. And if there is a need for us to enhance the seed, then we would build on the experience in our accumulated experience in enhancement. And we have also been doing evolutionary plant building, where we can filter through the features of the plant and keep only those that is most desirable. And we are also working with the local communities in hope that they would realize the value of their traditional seeds. If we don't have that diversity in seeds, you would actually harm the local biodiversity. And this is a very important area of the knowledge. Well, thank you very much. That's a very important angle. There is another question in the chat area where it says many potatoes, cauliflowers, and carrots. A lot of the premium of these plants actually have seeds imported from the Netherlands and from the United States and so on and so forth. How can we maintain seed security in China? From our perspective, what we can do is look at the eco farms and work with the local farming community to maintain and preserve their own traditional seeds. At the national level, of course, the government would have their considerations. They will also think about it from the food security perspective. For us, we have seen Professor Zhu from the Central Ethnic University. He has written about the richness of the traditional seed resources in the southwestern region of China. There is a great room for future growth still. We don't have a lot of participation of publicly or government-owned research institutes, and we hope in the future more seed scientists and nationally owned research institutes can participate in our work, because we do need to rely on everyone's concerted efforts to build up a reservoir of traditional seeds for China. Well, thank you very much. There are several other questions for our other speakers. We have a question for Madame Jensen.
Thank you very much for that question. In terms of BCPs, there are different websites at the CBD. There's NGOs. I will put some of those links in the chat box for people to access, but there's a very important and useful guides on how people can. The idea is that is owned by the partners and communities that develop the BCPs. It's supposed to be their own documents with only technical support in terms of the law, but I'm happy to put those linkages in the chat box. Yeah, thanks.
So what organizations will help the local communities to establish the BCPs? Do they do it themselves, or do they receive support from professional agencies or government agencies?
Well, in Southern Africa, you do have different government agencies that are supporting communities in developing their BCPs. That has its strengths and also its weaknesses. There's NGOs such as Natural Justice that's been involved for a number of years in supporting NGOs. There's also Resource Africa. We're also supporting communities in developing. We're also supporting the community, the Leaders Network, the CBNRM communities in developing their BCP. As I said, there's also at the CBD, different forums, UNDP, but I'll put those linkages in the chat box. Yeah. I see.
Okay, another related question.
In terms of the actual cash, as I mentioned earlier, the agreement was concluded in 2019. At this stage, they are still waiting on the levy to be paid. Due to COVID-19, it affected the cash payment, and there's some bureaucratic delays. But in terms of the actual amount of cash based on the annual tonnage for that year, it would be around 10 to 15 million South African rands is expected. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I have been reminded by the host that we have actually exceeded the time allocated to us. We have two final questions regarding our first speakers in session one. One is for Professor Zhou. In the region you conduct your research in, the logging and the log ban policies, is there a conflict, and how do you deal with it? Well, thank you very much for the question. I would like to first explain, as we are working in the region of the southern region of China, the trees grow really fast. Usually it takes the cedarwood tree to grow in between 18 to 25 years. After 25 years, the value of the timber would drop. If you continue to keep it until 30 years or older, these trees will naturally die off, and they would then collapse to the ground, which would also bring a lot of risk. And so the current national ban on logging and the current status quo, we are now considering where we can integrate all the different small forest farms from the small owners. And then we would divide this much larger concentrated forest and divide it into different blocks, and each block will be allocated at the beginning of the year as a logging area or a kept area, and the rotated logging of the period of the forest would actually maintain the biodiversity safety and maximize the economic value of the timber. And this is our consideration. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. This is probably one of the ways of sustainable management for artificial forests in China. Another question is relevant to this one as well. We talked about the cedarwood growing. This is a single species. Would that then damage the local biodiversity. Actually, even though when you look at it, it's like a huge forest of cheddar wood, but I've also talked about in my presentation, we have the intercropping of forest and crop, but we also have intercropping of different trees. So for example, we would have cheddar trees and other types of trees, such as eucalyptus, and different trees that has wider leaves. And when you intercrop the different trees, they will be able to build natural barriers for pests from one type of tree to the other. Thank you. Okay, so the intercropping is actually better than the singular plantation of just one type of plant. And it's actually a solution to biodiversity degradation rather than a reason. Yes, you can see the issue this way. Well, thank you very much for our 4 presenters and also our audience members who have been here with us all afternoon. This is a wonderful collection of presentations from Africa and China. Our 4 speakers provided us with wonderful case studies and experiences. I trust such a dialogue mechanism will continue in the future, especially as we get closer and closer to COP15. I would like to give the floor back to Dr. Peng Kui to moderate the next plans for future webinars. Dr. Peng Kui, the floor is yours. Well, I thank you very much to our 4 speakers for your wonderful presentations. We have 2 speakers speaking on the traditional EIA, and we have farming community cooperation projects. Even on traditional topics, we are facing a lot of challenges. So such sharing of knowledge is very, very significant. In our second session, we have also heard from 1 Chinese and 1 African expert on very important topics. We can look at how China and Africa deals with fragility of the different local communities. I thank Dr. Jin Tong very much for her moderating. This has been a smooth discussion and have provided her useful comments as well. Very briefly, I would like to talk to you about our next webinar. This would probably happen in October. As you know, in September on 26th and 27th, 28th, we're going to have a NGO parallel forum for COP15, and there is going to be a lot of NGOs and other Aboriginal communities and youth communities, women's communities to come and join our official parallel session, talking about how non-state actors can participate in the CBD framework. We also would encourage our African and Chinese partners to present your commitments and share with you your case studies. If such information and documents can be uploaded to our website, we will be able to hand those into the official site of the CBD. And these will be demonstrated globally. So we look forward to your contribution in that aspect. In October, there is another very important conference, which is the first part or first phase of COP15. This will be held between 11th to 15th of October. It's going to be a very tight schedule with a lot of important topics, and we look forward to your participation in October. And today, our discussion between ACBA and CSABC have our own WeChat groups and our own websites. So if you are interested in our future discussions and would like to learn more from each other, especially our African friends and our Chinese friends, if you wanted to share and exchange your views, please take a look at the current page where we would have a chat group and also ways of contacting each other. We look forward to hearing more from you. This brings us to the end of today's meeting. We thank the CSABC and ACBC friends very much. We thank GEI and AWF for the coordination and organization. Thank you very much. This is the end to our meeting. Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. For those who are supporting the coordination from ACPA and CSABC, if you'd please remain